Hello everyone, thank you very much for registering and coming along to today's webinar. Before I start, I'd just like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land from which I'm speaking to you from today. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands from which each of our online attendees are living and working, and also pay my respects to their elders past and present. I wish to also extend that same respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with us here today. By way of introduction, my name's Richard Wilson. I'm the Business Development Manager for DatacomIT. Joining me today also from DatacomIT is Christine Chetafati, who's acting as our host for today's event and has been responsible for coordinating all of our activity around it. Presenting an overview of Recollect today is Roger Mills, who's DatacomIT's digital preservation consultant and also our resident Recollect expert. But our special guest today, and a warm welcome please to Lachlan Glanville, who is the Senior Archivist from the University of Melbourne Archives. He'll obviously be our main presenter today, giving an overview of their implementation and use of Recollect for their archives. I guess before I hand over to Roger to actually give you that initial introduction of Recollect, just to position, I guess, where Recollect fits into the picture. So DatacomIT aren't the developers of the Recollect solution. We're in fact the Australian sales and implementation partner for Recollect. Those of you who aren't familiar with DatacomIT, we have an Australian-owned, privately owned company with over 40 years of experience in the archives and record management industry, providing specialist digitisation services. But Recollect, of course, is one of the solutions that we offer to our clients for the managing and of their online collections. The solution itself, Recollect, was developed by a company not too dissimilar to DatacomIT by the name of New Zealand Micrographics around 2010, 2011. And it was originally developed out of a need for their clients for who they were providing digitisation services for to store and share their collections online. But the popularity and the take-up of the solution with clients meant that they decided to actually create Recollect as a full standalone software as a service company. And that's when DatacomIT came on board as the Australian partner in 2019. And since then, Recollect has been focusing on the promotion and implementation of this solution throughout the US, whilst DatacomIT, of course, has been working with our clients here in Australia. So that's a bit of an overview of Recollect and who DatacomIT are. I guess just before we start, if anyone has any questions throughout today's event, as they come to mind, please feel free to enter them in the right-hand bottom corner of your screen. You'll see there's a chat box. If you do have a question as it comes to mind, please enter it there. We won't answer that immediately, but as we get to the end of both Roger and Lachlan's presentation, Christine will circle back to those and pose those to the appropriate person at the end of today's presentation. So please do feel free to add it as and when the question comes to mind. So I guess I'll now hand over to Roger for our introduction overview of Recollect.
All right, thanks so much, Richard. And I'm coming to you all from Gadigal land of the Eora Nation in Sydney. It's great to be back with our final Recollect webinar for 2025. God, the time's gone quickly.
2024.
2024, I should say. Look, this one is focusing on the role of archives in research and how Recollect is being used by university archives to not only maintain and preserve their collections, but as a research resource used by academics and broader community in which they're situated. As Richard said, I'm the project manager for Recollect implementations across Australia, and my background is actually in tertiary education as well, and public libraries, having worked for UTS here in Sydney as an academic for close to a decade before taking up this role in digital preservation. I also work very closely with our archives and collections management specialist, Jess McDonald-Norman, who I'd like to give a shout out to. Jess is a trained archivist and has a really detailed knowledge of archives and collections data management. And she's really instrumental in helping clients to shape the structure of their data and do all the linking and relationship building that Recollect's linked data model is well known for. And what I want to hope to demonstrate over the course of this presentation. All right. So why is my slide? Oops, jumped ahead of myself. To set the scene here, I thought I'd pulled out this quote from Paulus in 2010, which I just think really encapsulates really well what we'd be kind of talking today in terms of, you know, the history of the archive really is a history of changing communication technologies. You know, he's observed here that, you know, from orality to literacy, from scroll to codex, manuscript to print, paper to electronic media. And I think that really, as I was saying, kind of encapsulates the premise of today's session, really, how a contemporary archival management system like Recollect facilitates, you know, discovery, access, and engagement with providing research and support to assist scholars finding their primary resources, education and outreach, and obviously digital preservation as well to ensure that the long-term preservation of documents and photographs and other materials are maintained and continues on an ongoing basis. So as a way of demonstrating some of these attributes, what I thought we'd do is just jump into some live sites here. The University of Western Australia, which is an implementation a year or so ago now. And this was an interesting implementation in that we had to draw together three different units within organisations within the university, the Callaway Centre, University Archives, and the Library Special Collections. And so what we've created here is we brought in these individual units into one Recollect site, but each of them have their own collections within the site itself. So you can jump into the Callaway Centre, which is a music school, and you see all of the collection widget tiles here with some fascinating content. John Blacking being an ethnomusicologist, and of course Percy Granger, who would be well known to Lachlan and everyone in Melbourne as being Australia's leading romantic composer. And then of course, going back, you can also have a look at the special collections and the university archives. And it's just a way, we found this with a couple of universities now where they do have these different units, and bringing them together like this allows you to create an archive that will traverse a number of different organizations within your university. One of the other things you'll see here is all the theming and branding, of course, of each of these universities, which you can see in the header there, and of course the footer at the bottom. But I particularly like UCID's site for the way that they use the filters and facets. Just jump into the browse all here. A bit slow. And you can have a look at the various formats, and particularly the fish bones, the sort of the genus of fishbone skeletons. So here we have the kind of family of fish bones, the Spiratidae. And you can see each of those items from that family of fish. And of course, you have all of that metadata on that right-hand side. And this is what you'll see at every item level of a Recollect site. The University of Waikato have some really interesting content, particularly the Maori and Indigenous groups within the country. There's some fantastic content here through the collections widget, and this is what we really describe as an information item that allows you to draw in all of the assets related to this particular item type. And you can see here all of the assets that are drawn into it from here. So you can have photographs or newspaper articles, stories and events in the items archive as well. University of Melbourne, I won't spend too long on this, Lachlan, but do have a look at that. I think one of the things that was fascinating about your implementation, Lachlan, was setting it up as a collection management system as much as a digital archive as well, and drawing those two aspects of the collection together. So you have quite detailed information about the location of all of your physical items as well as your digital assets. And then finally, I might just finish on Griffith Archive, who've created collection items out of each of their campuses and their locations, which is a unique way of doing things again. So in each of these collection item tiles, you'll then see all of the buildings of that particular campus. The image and document view is really, really useful for researchers. We've got all of these tools on the left-hand side, but you can really scroll quite closely into a map like this, but you probably see even there, it's quite difficult to see that kind of finer detail. But if we go to zoom to 100%, it's the our NZMS, our colleagues in New Zealand who did this digitisation, really fantastic work there. You can see how well focused that is. And of course, the integration with Google Maps then allows you to jump out of a map from 1860 into that location today. So it really gives you that geographical context to a research item such as a map like that. I was really fascinated to find this particular item. It's Virginia Woolf's personal copy of her very first novel, The Voyage Out. And within this copy, the librarians found typewritten transcripts of additional information, additional parts of the story that she wanted in it. And if you can scroll up, you can see part of that there. With the OCR transcriptions ability of Recollect, just go to the text bar. You can see that's done a sort of pretty good job here, and someone's obviously gone in there and actually transcribed her typewritten text. So you can imagine her at the keyboard typing this, and you can see that this is all there from this text here. And of course, it all then becomes searchable within the site, text searchable within the site. So a unique use of OCR and transcription here, in that you could search for information that she put in herself from her own annotations. This is particularly useful for handwritten documents, where you can provide access to certain documents for volunteers, for instance, or students or other academic staff, to actually transcribe these handwritten documents. And just before we came online today, Lachlan was talking about that, and he may speak to that in his presentation as well. We can see they've started here with starting to transcribe this document here. What I was just saying there about Lachlan's and the University of Melbourne Archives implementation, combining digital assets with physical collections, Recollect does that really, really well. While not a university, this is an example of the ways in which you can do this, where you can actually have a microform where the location is, down to storage locations, even down to units. And shelf numbers and drawers. Now, the conceptual data modeling, if you like, of Recollect is this linked data model. And what it allows you to do is to connect information with assets. So, for instance, you might have a person in a photograph. It might be a dean or an academic researcher who's written a number of papers or a book. They may be mentioned in an oral history or be part of an oral history. They may have given the oral history in which they might have spoken about an event that's linked to a place. And it's really through this linked data model that allows you to be able to navigate and serendipitously browse these relational links. And it allows you to basically tell the story that's embedded in your metadata between items in your collection. And a really good example of that is this one here, a photograph of a school going back to 1902, but it contains two quite famous people in Australia's history, the two Smith brothers. And if you just click one of these links, if you're serendipitously browsing that, you go straight to the Keith Smith's biography page. And of course, that's drawing in through backlinks all of the assets that are related to him within the collection at the State Library of South Australia. So all the photographs, manuscripts, publications, objects, you name it, anything that's related to Keith Smith can be drawn into that one information hub. This is a really interesting part of Recollect in that you can scan objects in 3 dimensions as OBJ files, ingest them as OBJ files into the system, and it allows you then, without having to download any third-party software, to then view objects in 3D. Really useful for researchers who be interested in color variations or markings or even the contours of an object like this. And they actually worked with a computer sciences department, as I understand it, and through the Deep Time project, developed a way of integrating the Oculus Rift headset, so that when you had the headset on and the gloves on, you could actually feel like you were lifting up one of these objects straight from the Recollect site. So really good example of inter-organizational collaboration between departments in a university context. Time-based media and art is always, almost every university implementation we do works with an arts or curator at some point, and some really interesting examples of this. The University of New South Wales with their real-time real dance collections of videos of all of the dance semesters, courses that they've done. Recollect's also integrated with the Matterport API, which allows you to map locations within a building such as this, and Wesley College have done a great job here with an exhibition of Indigenous art they have. It allows you to then scroll through and then view information about that particular painting. And then you can carry on. Charles Darwin University has a significant art collection too, a contemporary art collection. Just a really nice way of displaying their art. Again, with all of that metadata on that right-hand side. Now, user geotagging user maps. Well, this essentially allows you to be able to layer items with geographical coordinates and view those items in those particular areas. So if we wanted to have a look at an item here from Oxford Street, you can see this is the City of Sydney Archives. Quite a lot. They're adding more and more each time I come to this site. May just come back to that. Let me just have a look at another one here. Just a few less. And you can see that item located in that geographical area. You know, of course, you link there again to the Google Street View. It can also be used as a search and browse functionality as well, where you could search for a particular item within this geographical location. Now, timelines is something that is often used by universities to demonstrate periods of time of the existence of the university. You can jump through to items on the bottom here. Winona School have got a really good one of their principles. And of course, when you click on one of these items, it takes you through to the item in Recollect and all of the information about that particular, in this case, principal, and all of the assets that are related to her time at the school. Thought we might just take a little quick dive under the hood in the time that we've got left. This is a Recollect item template, and this is what governs what you see on the right-hand side of it at an item view. And this is what we work on with you in the data workshops that you undertake during the implementation, how you want that data structured, whether it's something you want to carry across from the previous system or data that you just want to start again on and create new schemas. No, it can be any schema, come from the series system or Dublin Core or MARC or mods. And so it's a very easy way to configure highly configurable metadata templates. This is the admin view on the left-hand side here. You've got all of your site settings, managing content, we got to create an item, managing users, reviewing your contributions, and so forth. Now, this is something that is taken up to various degrees within universities. It allows, for instance, researchers to be able to add knowledge to your collections. You can tag photographs or leave recollections here, as I've done just before, a couple of years ago now, a few years ago now. You can suggest edits. So you might see this image from this elocution class. So well, actually it was April 24, not 23. So you can then suggest an edit to the administrators and add that, and they'll respond, probably asking more information about the information that you're providing, just to clarify it's correct. You can also provide the opportunity for people to upload content. So you don't have to log in to do that. You have to be a member, registered user of the site. So they can upload photographs or whichever item types you want them to be able to do. This is a nice little functionality that Jess has created, which is the then and nows. Allows you to be able to contextualize, a little bit like the Google Maps we were talking about before, contextualizing periods of time. Talked earlier on about tagging photographs. You can open this up to members of the institution, your researchers or other academics, or keep it closed. But where you show an image tag and you've created an item for that, so let's say in this instance, a person, it'll take you straight through to her information page and all of the, drawing together all of the assets that are related to her. And she was a principal as well at her time at the school. And there we have some oral histories showing you the chapter tags. You can add transcripts. Adding a caption is really easy as well. Just put in the start time. And update the time, add your caption. So I thought we might just summarize Recollects of Software as a Service hosted by Amazon Web Services at AWS here in Sydney. You get unlimited storage capacity, so unlimited amount of users. one of the things we take you through in the workshops is the role-based access and tiered privileges for accessing or providing access to various levels of content, as well as being able to integrate and have your content viewed in Trove. This was a very short overview, and if you want to get more of a detailed demonstration of Recollect, please contact either Richard or myself there. Be happy to tailor a demonstration to your particular context, have a conversation about what you've got and how we could structure a presentation. And I don't think any academic presentation is complete without a quote from Derrida. Give us some pause for thought while Lachlan's setting up. The question of the archive is not a question of the past, it's a question of the future, the question of the future itself, the question of a response, of a promise, and of a responsibility for tomorrow. And with that Derrida quote, I think I'm going to hand over to Lachlan. Thanks, Lachlan.
Thanks so much, Roger. Always good to start with a bit of Derrida. Just going to pop my slides up. Cool. So I thought I'd just start with like a sort of quick introduction of who we are. So University of Melbourne Archives, for those who aren't familiar with us, we are one of Australia's largest non-government archives. We sort of, in terms of the collection, it sort of sits around 23 linear kilometres, although that estimate varies a little bit depending on how you slice it. And, you know, like many university archives, we serve as like essentially the institutional memory of the university. We collect heritage records for the university. We are an official Class A place of deposit under the Public Records Office of Victoria. So all of the sort of high-level permanent business records for the university, we are the permanent home for. But what makes us slightly different to it is that we have a really incredible research collection that sort of extends outside of the university. Now, this was sort of established in about 1960 originally as, the original archivist was interested in collecting business records because he saw that as like a real gap in what the, state records and state libraries were collecting at the time. That sort of collecting remit expanded out fairly rapidly over the time into things like trade unions. We have an incredible trade union collection. Through that into protest movements, nuclear disarmament. And it's really sort of grown and extended from there. In the last couple of decades, some of our bigger acquisitions have been the personal papers of Malcolm Fraser, the records of the Australian Red Cross, papers of Germaine Greer, which is how I ended up with a job here. So it's really, it is an absolutely incredible collection that I feel incredibly privileged to work with. It's also worth noting that access to the collection is available to everyone. We don't just, we certainly service the university. Our core business is enabling research, across the globe, because, these sort of records are really of significance to people everywhere, not just people who are members of the university or people who are in Melbourne. So we've been in Recollect. We're about a year out from going live in Recollect. We migrated our entire collection management system and public catalogue into Recollect over the space of, felt very, very rapid, about 9 months or so. But it's worth sort of noting at this point that prior to us doing that migration and even selecting Recollect as the system that was going to carry us forward, we'd done a lot of initial work really thinking about how we want to be able to describe the collection and what sort of discovery we wanted to enable for researchers. You know, how do we want researchers to be able to navigate the collection and find, you know, what is potentially of relevance to them? So, you know, we were sort of the opinion that, like, the traditional archival structures that we'd been using for the past 60 years weren't maybe serving us as well as they possibly could. So moving away from that, we actually look towards the emerging standard of records in context, which brings in a whole bunch of additional network description of being able to describe additional contextual entities beyond the usual of records and people, corporations, and families, but into, you know, the realms of events, places, that sort of thing. So yeah, we did a lot of that foundational work to begin with. Really, the big reason for us kind of moving into Recollect was about supporting our users, making sure that they were able to navigate the collection in ways that made sense, both to them and to us. But the other component of that sort of data model question was really about how do we better capture what we know about our collection. We were finding we had so much knowledge about the context of what was in the collection, about how things connected in very different parts of the collection, that was really being held in our heads because we didn't really have a structure or a space to sort of capture those connections between different parts of the collection. So that was a really big part of it. In terms of that kind of user support question, we actually, you know, well before we went to market, we did some initial user research with researchers that we had, you know, had a prior relationship with. We did some qualitative analysis of how they were using the current catalog. And these were kind of the key things that came out of that we realized, you know, whatever public catalog we end up with, it's going to need to be able to do this. And like looking through, we've pretty much hit all of these. Some of these are in the roadmap for the year, particularly sort of the phrase and wildcard operators. That's definitely on the development roadmap. Lodging a request for material from the catalogue, that's on our to-do list. We'll hopefully have it done by the end of this year. But everything else works, you know, really Recollect does by default. That's just the way it's built. So for us, sort of at the time when we're looking at options, Recollect seemed like a really, really positive choice from an end user perspective. So I'm just going to jump out of this now and we can actually have a look at the implementation. Roger showed you our homepage here. As Roger mentioned, we managed the entire collection within Recollect. So that's physical items, locations, transfer documentation, that sort of thing, the whole lot. And sort of the flexibility of Recollect has been really useful for us in allowing us to kind of build the structures that we need in order to manage the collection, because we've got a lot of freedom in what sort of fields we want to configure, what sort of ideas do we want to encapsulate as kind of standalone concepts. I thought as an example, this is a really potentially sort of useful example of like where sort of the intersection sits between what we hold, what we do, and the sort of research that's enabled as part of this. Yeah, for sure.
We can't see your screen.
You can't see my screen, have I?
No.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I must have hit stop share.
No problem.
That should be all good.
Yep, looks great.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Right. Sure. So this is an example of like a kind of concept that, you know, we were kind of trying to encapsulate, and that we'd sort of like described in places all over the place. So this is what we've classified as like an event record, which describes the University of Melbourne Social Survey. So this was demographic research that was run between 1941 and 1943 by Wilfred Prest, who was a researcher at the University of Melbourne. So it's a particularly interesting set of data that, particularly because it sits in like a gap where the Australian census wasn't being run. It's been incredibly influential, even sort of like, you know, we're talking 80 years on now. So what we've managed to do with the data model that we've been moving to is to be able to encapture like a full sort of like detailed description of what the survey was, how it kind of was run, you know, who actually ran the survey. We can go through to records for Wilfred Prest, and then through to like the actual survey data itself. Now, we recently had these digitized in full. So these are the individual survey cards, which are sort of all sort of individually coded. You can see it was a very, very structured sort of process. There was a large team of primarily women who were basically going out door knocking at the time, sort of asking for participation. I think at the end they ended up surveying 7,600 respondents. They had a lot of refusals from people who thought that they were alien spies, which you can see sort of notated through here in various places. But yeah, this is an incredibly fascinating and useful set of data. So us being able to you know, get this sort of fully accessible in a digital form, have all the context around it encapsulated here. We can link out to sort of additional sources. So this is a link through to the Australian Data Archive, where which is a data set that was derived from those cards in 1981 by John Lack. So people have been working on these records for years. So yeah, this is a partially coded data set of the source records that are here. Now, we actually use these records quite a lot in our teaching and learning programs. We recently did a class getting sort of postgraduate students to respond to sets of records from the collection, to find ways that they could work with or interpret the collection from a you know, with their particular lens, which resulted in we have like a blog up here of various posts that of student responses to these records, and this is a particularly interesting one of a student who went through using machine learning. So he was able to self-serve from the catalogue to pull all the data that he required, all the assets that he required, which he was then able to run through a pipeline using machine learning to both codify the data in a structured way and then geocode it, which resulted in this. as kind of this is really just a proof of concept, but a way of kind of pinning tags on where the residences were that were sort of surveyed, but also you can sort of filter by the individual interviewer. So he sort of captured that sort of information as well. This is wonderful as like a proof of concept. Where it becomes actually exciting for us is the potential for us to take outputs like this and then feed them back into the collection. As Roger was sort of demonstrating, Recollect's got very good support for geolocation. If we can sort of take what researchers are deriving from our collection and then feed it back into our collection management system so that researchers can continue to build on that, then that becomes incredibly worthwhile both for us and for our user community. So it's just a very, very nice example of that, where we've sort of done this in a sort of like small way. This is a particular item that would have been one of the very, very early acquisitions of the University of Melbourne Archives that came in with a bunch of business records, but it's actually a letter detailing the journey from Sydney to Melbourne back in 1839. So you can see in sort of the detail here, this has been cross-hatched 4 different ways. The original's very, very fragile. We no longer issue it to the reading room for that reason. But, the digital access and the ability to really get into the detail, makes up for it in really good measure. But this being a record that has been sort of interpreted and been worked on by researchers, from the very beginning of like the Archives Foundation, means that we've got like a lot of detail, a lot of context about it, and we actually did have a full transcription of this that researchers have provided for us. So we no longer have to do that work, and we can pull that directly into the catalogue. So all of this text, all of the content of that letter is now fully searchable for researchers coming after. So yeah, it's a small example. We haven't currently opened transcription. That was interesting. We haven't opened transcription to public users yet because we're still working out an internal mediation process. But ideally, that's what we want to be doing, so that we're able to continue sort of building on the richness of the collection for records like this, for records like the press survey forms, so that we can get them into a structure where their researchers can take them and run with them. The last point I'll just end on really is like in that list of user requirements that we were looking for, one of them was to sort of, search across all levels of the archival hierarchy. At the time, we were talking to the researchers that we knew, the researchers that knew we existed and had a fair idea of what we held. So like a sort of broader and sort of probably more useful definition of that is that like we need to be able to be searchable and findable by researchers who don't know we exist, who are interested in like a topic or a subject, and find us that way. And that's been sort of impossible in our previous systems. unfortunately. What we've found since the implementation of Recollect is that we've had marked uptake in international researchers. In the last few months, we've provided material to researchers from Japan, from France, from Nova Scotia, the United States, and a lot of those are finding us just directly through Google. We did ask one researcher who was, she was writing something on the designer Guildford Bell, who was a Melbourne designer, and we asked how she found us, and she was like, oh, it was via Google. And sure enough, if you type in Guildford Bell archives into Google, you get State Library of Victoria up here, who have the main collection, but you get us as well, directly underneath it. This was somewhat buried in our previous catalogue because they're papers in relation to Guildford Bell, so they're actually within a different collection, within Andrew Grimwade's papers. Like just being able to be discoverable, it really is an expectation now by researchers that they should be able to find our material via standard search engines. And so it's really exciting to see that actually taking place, and to see different audiences and different researchers actually sort of coming to us for material. And I might leave it there.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lachlan. That's fantastic, and covering off some of those researching components and how they're using Recollect. Fantastic to see. Thank you for that. I'll probably hand over to Christine now, and just a reminder to our audience members that have attended, if you do have a question, please do pop it into the chat box there now. Christine will go through and she'll review each of those.
Yes. Okay, so we've got a question from Rosalind. Lachlan, this will be directed to you. Do researchers choose to feed their research back into the University of Melbourne Archives, or is this an action that archives manage?
This is currently something we're managing as we're kind of making that transition. It's less a question of like, can the system support it? And more, do we internally have the processes to mediate it, to make sure. Ideally, what we want is for researchers to be able to feed their research directly back into the catalogue, which, then we sort of give a check over and remediate anything that is required. But we would, the goal is for it to be sort of an organic thing rather than, so at this point where we are sort of manually doing that sort of work, but in the future we'll be looking at opening up that additional functionality.
Okay. I got a message here from Bo. So, hello, this is Bo. Sorry I'm a bit late as I was in another meeting. Well, Bo, just to let you know, the webinar is recorded and everyone will be, sent a link. So that's not a problem at all.
Mm.
Okay.
I can see that comment from Flick.
Oh, yes.
Which is
Go for
an
it.
interesting one. So Flick mentioned the prisoner of war records. This is an incredibly fascinating set of cards as part of the Australian Red Cross Archives. So it was a service that the Red Cross ran in trying to track down missing service people who may have ended up as prisoners of wars. And it's actually our largest, I'm just trying to bring it up now. Here we go. Cool. Yeah, so it's our largest series. We've got over 60,000 cards catalogued and is fully digitized. the whole lot. Now, in our previous catalogue, we really struggled with providing access to these records because it was just absolutely enormous. We had no relevancy ranking in our existing catalogue. It was really quite daunting, which was like quite disappointing to us because these are records that do have like significance to a huge swathe of like the Australian population. My grandfather-in-law is represented in here because he was interned in Changi. So in Recollect, this just works so much easier. We have the ability to sort of configure like custom search boxes so that you can search just within this series. Turnbull was his name. And so that will just bring up those sort of relevant results. But what we found as well is with the text indexing that Recollect enables, it sort of provides a different and richer sort of way in. Because now we can search for, say, a location for like a camp, like Changi. And this is, we haven't indexed these cards. This is purely via OCR, that where it's sort of identified that these cards have mentions of Changi within it. So like completely impossible in our previous system. So it's really exciting to be able to do much better by those records than we have been able to in the past.
Lachlan, I can't ask a question. You mentioned the Germaine Greer collection, and partly that's when you started working at
for sure.
Can you speak to how that, when you got your job and how your interaction with that collection, because it's a fascinating collection.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I first got a job as a cataloger on the Greer Archive shortly after it was acquired. I ended up processing the general correspondence series, which meant basically individually reading every letter in 120 boxes of correspondence of just about everything anyone had ever sent Germaine from the 60s onwards. But yeah, an absolutely incredible collection. And another one that is like a really, really frequently requested by international researchers as well. You know, and from a really wide range of disciplines. We've recently had research interest from like a publishing point of view of like looking at expatriate publishers specifically. So Sonny Mehta, who was the publisher of the original publisher of the Female Eunuch. Also from particularly from reproductive rights as well. And so we've I think a lot more people internationally are actually kind of finding these records and finding records that are relevant to their discipline, whether or not they're actually interested in Germaine. It's the sort of collection that touches on so many different topics and research users that it's nice to see it getting some attention.
Yeah, when we were doing the implementation, I didn't realise she'd actually been an academic at University of Melbourne.
She wasn't an academic at University of Melbourne. She briefly studied here, very briefly. She was an academic at University of Cambridge for a long time in classics.
You've got another question. John.
Yes, we have. For Lachlan, what can you say is your best take on using the Recollect compared to other systems?
I think for us personally, the real kind of what really drew us to Recollect was the flexibility of the data model. Was the really big thing, was being able to not necessarily be bound by, like, I love archival standards, they exist for a reason, but we were finding that we were really hamstrung by the way certain systems interpreted those standards. And so being able to kind of on the fly go, well, we need a field for this. Let's, what, would be, in some systems, 12 weeks of development work becomes like 5 minutes from the admin panel. So that's a real big one for us, and a really big one with that work that we were doing in terms of like thinking about how we wanted to describe the collection, what sort of structures made sense for us, because that was very, very experimental. We've been able to iterate on it quite a lot. So post-implementation, we brought in the papers of Joanna Murray-Smith, fairly prominent playwright. And what we realized when we did that is we didn't have kind of a space or a concept for like an abstract intellectual work, like a play. We could describe things that occurred in space and time. We could have describe places, but we couldn't describe like the idea of like a book, or like the actual underlying work of a book. And so, with sort of like minimal work, we're able to have that up and running, and is now that's the way that you can navigate that collection. If you're interested in, if you want all of the documentation for female as species, then it's all linked to a single authority record. So that's the big one for me, really.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? We've got a few statements here. From Rosaline, University of Western Australia Collected is an incredible platform after seeing how they presented and connected a donated item. So I guess, Roger, you were involved in the University of Western Australia's Recollect implementation?
Yeah, indeed, yes. And it was an extraordinary implementation, as I said in the outset there, the demonstration of bringing those 3 business units together. It was a feat of collaboration, and well done for them. They were a great team to work with.
I'm just thinking we are coming up to the hour, and we do try to keep it right on that time. We know, and thank everyone for taking that hour out of your valuable day. I think there is one last question there.
Is that to me? Can we action minimum budget to get results 3D of archives so research can describe completely? Well, nothing is cheap in this world, Bayu. You'll need to scan objects you need to work with a digitization operator. We can certainly recommend who to work with there. We scan them and output them as OBJ files, which Recollect can then ingest. Yeah. All right.
And if anyone does have any other questions in those email correspondence you would have received, obviously there'll be a follow-up information that you can get in touch with either Roger, myself, or Lachlan. And of course, Christine will be sending out a link to everyone with a recording to today's session if you did need to rewatch it. And of course, our contact details so you can get in touch with any other queries. So thank you all to everyone once again for coming along and attending today's session, and especially to Lachlan for providing today's presentation on some of the research and how they're using Recollect and improving the ability for researchers to find and locate the content that the archives have. So thank you very much, Lachlan. Greatly appreciated.
Yeah.
Thanks, Roger.
Thanks,
and Richard.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Bye.
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 Till next time.